Hi everyone, and welcome to another webinar by the World Institute for Action Learning. My name is Tom. I lead WILE Poland, which is the Polish affiliate of the World Institute for Action Learning, and I will happily lead this webinar for you. Let's get started. Okay, and here we are with the slides. As you can see, the subject of this webinar today is coaching tools in action learning. So I will be talking about how I use tools that are normally used in individual and executive coaching in team coaching, especially in the variety of action learning. So you will hear about tools that are not taught by default when people learn action learning. Make sure you take notes while watching this webinar. Yes, the recording of this webinar will be available for you later on. You will be able to watch it as many times as you want, but it may be just easier for you to capture those things that will be important for you and will resonate with you. Now, the plan for this webinar is really simple. I will tell you three basic things. Number one is I will say a few words about where is the space for coaching tools in action learning, in which situations, what moments are those in which you can use action learning, tools in action learning. Number two, I will give you three tools from individual coaching to be used in action learning setting. Mind you, I will not be explaining these tools in details. If you don't know these tools, make sure you Google them, go and do some research, learn them before you use them in your team coaching sessions. But I will explain them very briefly so that we all have the common understanding of what they are. And then number three, I will give you 5 tips on how you can use any tool you know in action learning. Okay, but before we do that, let's say a few words about what action learning really is, because there are experts watching this webinar, experts in action learning, and we have some people who are here for the first time, have maybe so far haven't heard about the World Institute for Action Learning and have not learned action learning yet. So let's explain this process briefly. So if I were to explain action learning in one sentence, I would say it's an intensive process in which a team work on an important and complex challenge, and that's action, and take actions, that's action too, and learn as they go. So we have action solving complex problems that are real, urgent, current, not past. We don't just draw conclusions, best practice and lessons learned. That's important. We do use that in action learning, but that's just a part of action learning. The core of any variety of action learning is working on current, complex, real business, usually business, not only, but oftentimes business problems, and then learning, which really in reality, learning here means increasing the quality of work, increasing the satisfaction from work, the speed of that work, the effectiveness, increasing its quality. That's applied learning. Doing something, and then as we go, we draw conclusions from how we're doing it to apply those conclusions instantly. That's the core of action learning. And in practice, you can use this approach as group or team coaching. So helping people grow their effectiveness while helping them at the same time deliver business results. Now, where in action learning can you find space for implementing coaching tools, especially tools from individual or executive coaching? Now, that space is in coaches' interventions. While action learning is pretty specific as far as different varieties of action learning are concerned, this process assumes that the coach, the action learning coach, will be sort of a side of the team, is not exactly part of the team, but sits beside the group who's working and is observing the group and will intervene anytime he or she will find opportunity for learning. So really intervention will be a coach's action on the basis of his or her observations of the here and now, of the process. The action learning sessions is very different from a workshop. The coach doesn't have an agenda, just like a trainer will have an agenda for a workshop. It's different from a facilitation. Many facilitators will also have an agenda, will plan their sessions beforehand, which is a good idea. But an action learning coach will allow the group to start working on the problem, and then we'll be observing the group to every now and again say, let's pause for a second. Let's take a look at how we're working now. What's going on between us? What is the level of communication? What is the quality of the progress towards, finding a solution, planning actions? How are we doing listening to each other? And so on and so forth. That's how coach works. And this is where you will find space for using tools from individual coaching, executive coaching in action learning setting. So you don't plan these things beforehand. You will sit, allow the group to work, you observe, and then on the basis of those observations, you say, hey, you know what? I have an idea. I'd like to offer you something. I have an idea to show you something. Would you like to see it? And then you use that coaching tool on the basis of the here and now. And that's the beauty of action learning coaching. This is the clue of action learning coaches' work. Not planning the process beforehand, but intervening on the basis of what is happening between people here and now. That's the whole art of being an action learning coach. Now, what are the 3 tools you can use in this way? So imagine you have your team, you have a group of people, and you say, okay, what would you like to talk about today? What issue are we solving today? What is the issue that you're struggling with? What exactly is the problem that we want to talk about in the next hour? People say, and then you do the process. In action learning, we have 2 ground rules. One ground rule says statements may only be made in response to questions, and questions can be asked by anyone of anyone at any time. So people basically have to ask questions to trigger reflection and creativity and stay focused on the topic of the discussion. And they answer questions. That's the whole idea. It's very simple, but very powerful and very different from what people normally do. So you say, okay, so this is the problem. Thank you very much. Who has the first question? And then you start the process and you allow people to work. And then you set yourself aside, so to speak, and you watch what is going on. And every time and again, you have the authority to say, okay, excuse me, I'd like us to stop for a second. Let's pause for a second. Let us look at how we're doing right now, what is going on between us. And then you use that coaching tool that actually you see will be useful here. It's not planned ahead, but it's right there in your mind in that moment that it may be useful to use that tool. Okay, what's the first tool? The first tool could be called association and dissociation. So association and dissociation are 2 states of our mind in which every mind of any human being is every now and again. And our mind basically switches between these 2 states. So when we are associated with something, when we are in the state of association, we experience the situation fully. We experience our emotions, feelings. We are deep in our thought process. We are in the situation. When I ski, I love skiing. It's very joyful for me. I forget about all the world out there. I just focus on my enjoyment of that action. When I have a problem and I'm associated with that problem, I struggle, I think, I analyze, I try to come up with ideas. That's the state of association. But the state of dissociation is sort of stepping aside, stepping back, and taking a look at your situation from a perspective. So in classic individual coaching, a coach could say to the client, why don't you stand up and stand beside your chair, look at that chair, imagine you are sitting there. And then the coach could ask a few questions. What thoughts are coming to your mind right now when you're looking at yourself? What advice would you give to yourself? That's a classic question. How do you see the situation now? What do you think that person is really struggling with? What do you think that person is missing right now? What do you think that person is spending too much time on? And so on. So you're taking a look at something from a perspective. How do we do it in action learning? Actually, this what I will be talking right now, this is sort of embedded in action learning. I'm starting from this tool because we actually use that tool. It's not new. I said before I would tell you about tools that you wouldn't use in action learning by default. This one, I lied. This one you actually would. The other two that I will give you, not necessarily. This one, yes. How do we do it in action learning? We say, let's pause for a moment, take a look at how we have been working so far. Okay, dear team, now what is the quality of our communication? So in reality, the coach says, okay, let's dissociate from our work so far, from the problem. Let's take a helicopter view and look at the process that is happening between us. How are we doing listening to each other? And then people respond. When they respond, you ask further questions. So these are just first questions that you would use in that intervention. This is not the entire intervention. The idea is that the coach actually enters in a dialogue with people, with the team. I ask a question, they respond. I ask another question on the basis of what they say. For example, they say, well, our communication is smooth, but I'm feeling that we're not revealing everything, that we're not completely honest with each other. Then I could say, okay, well, what do you think is the impact of that? How do you feel this is affecting our work, our effectiveness? And then they respond. And then I can ask further questions, which in the end will lead to learning in the form of action that will be different from what they did before. So I might at the end say, okay, how do you really want to work in the next 40 minutes? What do we want to change in our work? What do we need from each other in this communication? And in what specific behaviors do you want to see it happen? Things like that. Where does each of us see the core of the problem? Let's find out. How do we see the core? One of the most important, crucial questions in while action learning. We know that when people talk about complex issues, people see those issues differently because they have different competences, experience, cultural background, age, organizational hierarchy, stuff like that. Let's see, where does each of us see the real problem here? Very often it appears that it's different. Well, let's talk about it. How does this affect our future work? What can we do to agree on what the real problem is here, so that we can be solving the same problem and not different problems? What is happening between us right now? I sometimes ask this question when I'm not sure myself what is happening. Something's going on and I feel in my stomach it's not efficient, it's not good. This can be really more effective. I'm not sure how to name it. Let's pause for a second. I'm observing something that I'm not even sure myself how to name. What do you think, my dear team, is happening between us right now regarding our communication or cooperation between each other? And then they will tell me how they see it. What assumptions are we making in our discussion? I remember leading one session in which this was a crucial question. Actually, this was in a coach certification program that we run in the World Institute for Action Learning. And I ran it in Poland. And the way I usually work is that one of the participants is running the session, and then I sit aside, I'm observing, and then I give feedback. Every time and again, I will join the session to show what I would do as a coach, or to. So in that particular session, the problem presenter had a dilemma, whether to do this or that in her business. And then I'm listening to the discussion and the questions that appear. And I'm thinking, boy, these questions, although very thoughtful and insightful, they seem to be directing that person towards one of those solutions. And we don't really want that. We want to trigger reflection, but we don't want to be too suggestive in action learning. So I say to the coach who's practicing running her first session in her lifetime, I say, can I interrupt and take over your role for a second? Fortunately, she said yes. I say, okay, now think about the last 10 minutes of our discussion, all right? And write down any assumptions that you feel you heard in those last 10 or 15 minutes? It doesn't matter from whom. It doesn't matter what kind of assumptions. Just assumptions that you heard in the questions asked. And then it turned out everybody could see that the questions that were asked by numerous participants, not only one, actually were leading that person towards one particular solution, but indirectly, under the table, so to speak, so that it wasn't clearly visible, but you could feel it. So the coach's role is also to bring these things to the surface, using that technique of dissociation. So saying, stop, let's take a look at what is going on between us. Okay, that's how you would use this tool. Now, the next tool, the wheel of a team, which is a variation of a tool that you could say a wheel of life. And if you are into life coaching, I'm sure you know Wheel of Life. The idea of this tool is that in your individual executive session, you would ask your client, hey, what are the key areas of your life or of your business? In terms of life, one could say friends, family, money, work, leisure time, things like that. Business, maybe profit, maybe relationships with my team, maybe work-life balance, things like that. Okay, we list, I say from 5 to 10 areas, not fewer than 5, not more than 10. When it's more than 10, it becomes too complicated. When it's fewer than 5, it's too little content to work on. So we list them, we draw a circle, we divide that circle into as many parts as we have those items on our list. And I will ask my client, how do you rate each area of your life or business on a scale from 1 to 10 when it comes to your satisfaction from that area? And let's mark it on that wheel. Okay, so what is the satisfaction from, your relations with your family? 6. What is your satisfaction from your, how you handle money? Well, that's 7. Okay, and then that's how we mark different areas of that person's life on the wheel. And then at the end, I could say, well, what do you see right now? What are your conclusions? What are your reflections when you're looking at the situations right now? Which area is the key area? Which one is most important? Where do you see the first changes possible? Which area do you think should be changed first? And so on and so forth. I could ask, numerous questions. And that's exactly how you could do it with your team. So imagine you have an intact team, so people who work with each other on an everyday basis. You say, hey, you know what? Something comes to my mind. Let's pause for a second. I'd like to offer you a tool that may show you in a clear way which direction to take when it comes to your team development. Would you like that? They say, hey, why not? All right. Okay. Well, what are some important areas of your work? So maybe relations, and don't accept cooperation. We are actually looking for areas of cooperation. So maybe exchange of information between each other. Maybe how we refer to each other, the level of respect. Maybe the quality of communication. Maybe our relationships with our stakeholders. Maybe with the board. Maybe with our internal clients. Maybe how we divide accountability. And so on and so on. So they name areas of their work as a team. And then I draw a circle on the flip chart. I divide that circle or wheel into as many parts as I have items on my list. And then I say, okay, well, from 1 to 10, what is your score as far as your satisfaction goes from that particular area? Or how you see its effectiveness, relationships with the board, exchange of information, mutual relationships, or the level of respect, or the quality of our communication, whatever. I mark those areas, mark those scores on those areas, and then I say, okay, well, what do you think needs to be changed? Which one is the key area? Which one is the first area that you think we should change in order to see other areas change? That's a cool question as well. So that's how you can, and by the way, when you're asking people about the score from 1 to 10, I just usually take the average score. So when I say, what is your satisfaction from your team's relationships with the board? 5, 7, 8, 6. I feel like 6, 7 is pretty much the average. Okay, let's mark it. That's probably the fastest way to do it. So basically the idea is to put their observations on the flip chart in the form of a wheel with different areas and scores on those areas, and then draw appropriate conclusions. And then the questions you will ask at the end will depend on what is going on in that session, in that team, what they really need, why you're using that tool. But classic question would be, what do you wish to work on now? Which one is the key area? What needs to be changed? Pick one area that will influence all the others. That's how you can use it. And basically the idea is to help the team pick the direction of their team development. Okay, and tool number 3, Eisenhower's Matrix. It's a classic tool for individual coaching, allowing the client to see how much time he or she spends on different categories of tasks. What General Eisenhower did as a busy person, he came up with 4 variables that allowed him to create this tool. Those variables are important, not important, urgent, and not urgent. And important basically means that something is important if it makes your boat go faster. It adds to your development. Something is urgent when it's time-bound, when you have to do it now. And so when you use these variables, you have 4 categories. Things that are important and urgent, important but not urgent, not important but urgent, and not important and not urgent. And so the idea is to think about all your tasks and put them into those categories just to see a bigger picture and then decide what needs to be changed. And that's exactly how you can use it with your team. Imagine you are working with an intact team again. And so you say, okay, let's pause for a second. I'd like to offer you this tool that may help you see in a clearer way how much time in your team you spend on different things. Would you like that? Okay, well, you draw that matrix on the flip chart, 2 sentences of explanation, not more. People get the idea. Maybe you can give some examples. And then you say, what do we usually talk about in our meetings? Which category? Things that are important and urgent, or maybe things that are urgent, but not necessarily important. So what do you talk about in your everyday meetings? How much time do we spend on not important and not urgent issues in these meetings? Which of our behaviors between us would you define as not important, meaning not constructive? They don't make the boat go faster. And not urgent as well. So what behaviors, what of our actions would you like to see gone from our team? Things like that, maybe. Which category would you like more in your meetings? What things do you not talk about, but you like to? What do you miss talking about in your everyday meetings? And then what are the proportions in your everyday work? Again, these are exemplary questions. This is not a full list. And once you ask these questions, people respond, you enter in a dialogue, so you ask further questions, always to direct them towards 2 most important processes: reflection and accountability. What do you think? What new ideas comes to your mind when you hear this question, when you see this tool? And what do you want to talk? What do you want to do about it? What do you want to do with these reflections? How differently will you work? That's the idea. Okay, hopefully this makes sense to you. Some tips for using any tool, because these tools were just exemplary. Number 1, use a simple and cohesive process which will allow you to be aside while the team is working. In the World Institute for Action Learning and with our coaches, we use action learning. If you don't know action learning yet, learn it. That's tip number 1. If you want to use, these tools, this approach in the nearest future, make sure you use some kind of a cohesive process. in which, or by means of which, you will create an environment in which you can use those tools. Because those tools are like applications in your Android, iOS, your Mac, iPhone, Windows, computer, whatever. They're programs, they're tools. And every tool, every app needs an operating system, needs an environment in which you can use these tools. So it's effective, smooth, it makes sense, it's not a surprise to people. So make sure, especially when you are a team coach, if you are a manager and you want to do things like that with your team, that's fine. But when you work as a team coach, make sure you have a process in which people will be able to talk about something that is important for them, not for you, something that is important for them. Most likely it will be a problem, an issue that requires solving. And while they're working, you are able to intervene and say, let's pause for a second. I'd like to offer you something. Number 2, when you see a learning opportunity, offer your tool. So that's exactly what you use. So what you do as a team coach, when people are working, you look for the learning opportunities. That's what you do when you observe your team. And then use questions to trigger 2 most important processes. Make sure your questions aim at these 2 most important processes: reflection and accountability. New thoughts, new ideas, learning. And then, what do we do about it? How differently do we want to work? What different actions do we want to take from now on? If we had more time, I could ask you guys from which book on individual and executive coaching these 2 processes come. In which book does the author repeat again and again the importance of these 2 processes? Maybe somebody knows? 3 seconds for reflection. John Whitmore, Coaching for Performance, the godfather of life coaching and business coaching, the person who offered us the GROW model. In his book, chapter by chapter, he repeats the idea of coaching is to trigger reflection, to broaden awareness, actually. To broaden awareness and invite people to be more accountable for their life, business, for what they do, for the change they want to see. And then number 4, keep your interventions short and succinct. Don't allow for elaborative discussions in your interventions. We don't want that. What we want is give people enough time for the problem, for their work, for the issue that they have to solve. But we want to trigger reflection as well. So we do intervene, but we keep those interventions short, succinct. Sometimes when I use these tools, like the Wheel of Team or the Eisenhower's Matrix, I don't do it during the session, but I may do it at the end of a session or at the beginning of the next session. Now, I finish this session, I have my reflections as a coach. I always ask myself these 2 crucial questions from while action learning, which is what are we doing well and what can we do better? So I ask myself, what did I do well in that session? What can I do better? And then I'm thinking, okay, it makes sense for that team to take a look at the Eisenhower's Matrix. I'm going to start the session. Before we go on to action learning, I'm going to offer this tool. We will spend 10 minutes on reflecting and planning change, and then we'll move on to our usual action learning work. That's what I could do as well. And then remain neutral. The whole idea of action learning coaches' work is that there's no suggestion, no giving advice, no saying what to do next, no moderating discussion. I'm here to help, but I'm not sure what is good for you. Only you can be sure what is good for you or not. I can trigger your reflection. I'm here to help you learn. I'm here to help you get more ideas, to offer you different tools. But you have the answers. I have the questions and you have the answers. So make sure you don't judge, you don't suggest, you don't moderate. I mean, you could suggest a tool, but you don't necessarily suggest the final solutions, what the team should or shouldn't do in that particular situation and so on. So there's no judgment, no evaluation, no giving advice. already answers to their questions when they're not sure what to do next. Well, let me help you out so that you can find the answers what to do next. I'm not going to give you the answers. Okay, so these are the tips. Hopefully you can use these tips, you can use these tools in your team coaching sessions. If you don't know Weil Action Learning yet, make sure you go to weil.org. Go to weil.org to learn about coaches certification. We do that certification online. These are actually photographs from my programs in Poland. One is from an online program, a marvelous, wonderful group. And then another one is from a face-to-face group. We did that online program when coronavirus it's still around. Actually, when I'm recording this webinar, coronavirus is still around, unfortunately. So we had to move the programs to the online world. But not sure when you will be watching this video. Maybe the face-to-face programs will be around again. So go to weil.org to learn about the programs, about the coaches certification. Weil is the only body in the world certifying action learning coaches, so it's worth taking a look at. Thank you so much for being with me in this webinar. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the like button if this was of value to you, and I hope to see you in one of our next webinars, one of our next videos. Take care, keeping fingers crossed for you, and have a good time doing action learning. Bye-bye.